Great, thanks so much. And yeah, thanks for putting me right after lunch, too. Really appreciate it. Thanks, Jack. I'm going to sing you a song. Is that okay? When he says pastoral ministry, I'm actually involved in children's ministry, okay? So you guys are no different. You're just being bigger bodies, okay? If I could, I would have you all just come on up here, and then we'd have a story time. But remember the song, My God is So Big? Remember, my God is so big, so strong and so mighty, there's nothing my God cannot do. And then, right? And then I like to change the verse. It says, the income statements are his, the balance sheets are his, the annual report is his too, right? Because I think we're how many of you guys are stressed out a little bit? Yeah, a little stressed out, right? Economic situation, a lot of things going. But really, that song is so true. My God is so big, so strong and so mighty, there's nothing he can't do. The recession is his. Everything's his. All of our issues that we have, they're his. And let me just encourage us. I heard Dr. Gordon MacDonald speak one time, and he says, when we look through the scripture, you cannot violate the principles of God and expect the blessings of God. Amen? You cannot violate the principles that God has outlined in his scripture and expect to receive his blessings. You know, an article that came out, the thing that just really caught my eye said, what if there were no prophets? This is from GuideStar. I think it was mentioned earlier in one of the speakers. What if there were no nonprofits? What if there were no longer the churches today? I wonder what would happen within the very communities that we're living in today. So my desire today, over the next 30 minutes, I'm going to try to get through 19 slides in 30 minutes, and then we have a wonderful panel of experts to come up and share some of their insights. But it's talking about how to measure and communicate the financial health of your ministry. You know, when you think about it, ever since we were babies and infants, we've always been measured, right? Always measured. Make sure he's got all 10 toes and fingers, and how tall is he? That's the first thing they do. They put the baby on there, and they go, 19 inches. Okay, great, congratulations. What does that mean? Well, my daughter, when she went to the doctor during her 18-month checkup, the doctor said, you know what, your daughter, Lauren, is in the 98th percentile in height. And I said, well, doctor, look at her dad. Why are you laughing? Back in junior high, I actually played center on the basketball team. I'd be considered very tall. But all that to say is we are living in a world of measuring. And I'm going to try to build a case of why we need to bring measurement back into the ministry and measuring specific things within the ministry. Obviously, in the context of where I serve and what I live in, it's all about financial related, right? Look at a lot of financial statements and a lot of numbers. Have you ever taken a look at, this is the cockpit of a 747. On average, a 747 has 970 switches, knobs, and gauges. I don't know how the pilot looks at all this stuff. What is important? And I would venture to say maybe some of our ministries, maybe there's some dashboards out there that you have in your ministry that you take a look at. But I would also venture to say that a lot of ministries don't have dashboards. Maybe some of your churches the dashboards look like this. It's like, oh my goodness, what's going on? But there's somewhere in between where if we fail to measure what's going on in the ministry versus maybe measuring a little bit too much. One of my bosses years ago, he asked, hey, you know what, we're going to go up to Big Bear Mountain, I'm going to fly. Anybody want to fly with me? And I said, I will. I'll fly. And we went into this little single-engine Cessna. Flew out of Fullerton Airport. He says, David, take a hold of I can't remember what it was called, steering wheel. I said, okay. And he gave it to me in the midst of a cloud. And I said, Scott, are you kidding me? I can't see. And he goes, yes, you can. Look at the instrument panel. Because in the midst of blindness, in the midst of when you can't see, you need to know if you're still staying the course of where you need to head. He says, see the little plane? Make sure it just stays level. If it's upside down, that's not good. I'm not a pilot, but I understood the language. And maybe in our ministries, during the times of turbulence, during the times of not being able to see, I wonder what we take a look at to ensure that our ministries are headed in the direction that God has called us to. If you take a look at the passage in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 6 through 8, And I know there are always two camps. There are always camps about, you really can't put God in a box, right? Nor do I ever even dream to think about trying to put God in a box. Yeah, if I had a black or white little box, I'd put Jesus in, right? Remember, I'm in children's ministry, so we don't want to put God in a box. But what I'm encouraging us in when Paul says this, I planted the seed and Apollos watered it, but God has been making it grow. Understand that it is God who causes the growth. God is the one who always initiates. What I'm encouraging us and challenging us as ministry leaders is that we begin measuring maybe the planting portion of it and maybe the watering portion of it. Because at some point in time, maybe we're watering too much. Maybe we're not watering enough. Maybe we're planting in the wrong soil. I think we need to bring ministry metrics back into the ministry. And so Dr. John Lingle says this. I love his language here. He says, from the metrics group, he says, you get what you measure. You measure the wrong things, and you'll get the wrong behaviors. Isn't that true? Maybe within your ministry and the staff of what you're taking a look at and how you're holding them accountable, what you're measuring in your ministry. That'll dictate the kind of behaviors you're getting. My brother, who's an engineer at a company down here in Huntington Beach, he and I always have arguments and disagreements about leadership principles. And I remember one time, this was years ago, I think he's changed. But he said, I can't have my engineers taking breaks longer than they need to. I said, well, what do you do? And he goes, I make sure that their bathroom breaks are no longer than 2 minutes. I'm like, are you kidding me? That's to the nth degree of measuring. Please tell me you have something else better to measure than bathroom breaks. But I'll tell you what it did was it changed the behavior among his engineers. They're like, okay, ready, go. But the thing is, you're going to measure what you value. And that's really why as ministries, we're vision-driven, we're mission-driven. You have to understand what value you bring to your community and what God desires for you. Measure what you value, or you're going to end up valuing what you measure. If you end up measuring the wrong things, you're going to end up valuing the wrong things. And so here's the question that I think the big ministry question is this. Steve Moore, who's the president of Mission Exchange, he asked this question. I love it. If a stakeholder in your ministry asked if you are making progress toward your vision and mission, what specific information would you reference to validate your answer? Try that exercise among all the board members and say, where would they point it to? I had a great discussion with one of the boards the other day in Colorado Springs, and I had them on just a Post-it note. I said, this is the finance committee and the board. And I said, I tell you what, why don't you, just on a piece of paper, just write down what you think your ministry is doing in terms of financial health, A, B, C, D, or F. Write it down. Don't talk to each other. They wrote it down. Chairman of the board said, I think we're doing great. Give ourselves a B. I think we're doing good. You heard a B, you heard a C. Didn't hear an A, that's good, okay? Not good, but it's the fact that they were almost on the same page. The bookkeeper said she was scared to give her grade. I said, so, Connie, what's the grade? She goes, a D. You see, you think that ministry has some challenges? It does. Because the leadership isn't even on the same page. They don't know what they're taking a look at. They don't know how they're measuring it. What are you taking a look at? What dashboard system do you have in the ministry for everybody to take a look at in terms of all the stakeholders and say, yes, I know, we as a ministry know exactly where we're at. Take a look at this. I think Jack mentioned it, the ministry advisory panel. This is an example. One of the questions that came up was, in this particular survey is, how is your ministry adjusting the following budget categories? Okay? And there's a wealth of information out there on the internet, on the ECCU website, but this is one of those. Talking about budget, we're in the midst of budget for a lot of ministries today. How is your ministry adjusting the following budget categories? Imagine this. It says, in all 6 of the budget categories surveyed, half or more of the respondents had no changes planned. And basically, the categories were obviously ministries, project programs, benefits, salaries, personnel, both full-time and part-time. Over half of them, or more of the respondents had no changes planned. And don't focus necessarily on the number, but the question I'm going to ask after this. The other conclusion was that the category with the greatest cumulative change of 48% was projects programs, with 27% increasing them and 21% reducing them. The category with the least amount of change that they say they were going to adjust into their budget was 23% cumulative. Benefits, 18% were going to reduce, and 5% only 5% increase. There's a lot of adjustment going on within ministries and the budgets that we take a look at. That's our dashboard that we look at every day. My question, as I was taking a look at this, is on what basis are these ministries making these budget decisions? On what basis? What's the benchmark you take a look at? How do you make the decision whether to actually make the cut in staffing expense or versus the program expense? And I think everything has to do with keeping your line of sight to the mission and the vision of what your ministry is about. The question, the big ultimate question is, why do we need to measure? Why I think as ministries we need to measure. First thing, I think it establishes your current position. You don't know where you are until you know actually where you need to go until you know where you're at. Every time I drive here to California from Colorado, my family, we drive here. As soon as we get all right on the freeway on the C-470, my daughter's first question, are we almost there? And I said, honey, we've done this drive like 10 times. Are you kidding me? You know, we just left. Relax, we got 15 and a half hours. You don't know where you're going until you know where you've actually started. It establishes your current position. The other thing is it communicates movement and directions. And I would imagine of these 9, there's even more, a wealth of information from the ministries represented here. But it communicates the movement and the direction to the stakeholders. Stakeholders I'll talk about a little bit later on. Those are the people who have invested and have a stake within the ministry and how well it does. But it communicates to everybody, that board, we're headed in the same direction. Serves as a catalyst to change. When you measure something, just like my brothers, a bunch of engineers, right? Oh yeah, their behavior changes drastically. I wonder what you measure within your ministry today and how that measurement affects and impacts the behavior of your staff. It clarifies expectations. Expectations is so huge. I always tell my son, expectations. In school, you know what it is. It's always an A. Expectations, okay? Never below. Never below. And it's okay. He'll get there sometime. He'll hit a B. But see, don't you dare go there, right? So these are expectations that we've set as parents to him. But within the ministry, what are the expectations that we have of our staff, of our congregation, of the donors within your parachurch organization, of the parents in the school? You can't manage what you don't measure. That's the old business saying, right? If you don't measure it, you don't know whether you're improving or you're regressing. And in the ministries, again, it's that whole tension between, yeah, but we don't want to put God in a box. I'm not asking us to put God in a box. I'm asking us, the ministries, measure the planting and the watering of what we do, of what Paul has encouraged us to do. Enables accountability. Mark spoke earlier today, introduced about what some of the biggest challenges of ministries are today and why ministries are struggling. Accountability, lack of accountability and leadership. Lack of accountability among the staff leaders. I'm probably one of the very few children's pastors who asks my treasurer, I want to see the financial statements. Like, why do you want to see that? Because it's important to me to make sure that I stay the course within what has been entrusted to me as a steward. Influences deliberate behavior. We talked about that. Deliberate behavior. What kind of behavior are you trying to model? What kind of behavior are you trying to communicate to your ministries? And then last, it's providing early warning signs. The early warning signs, let me give you some examples of early warning signs. This may get into a little bit detail. This centers around those ministries that actually have debt, okay? For those who don't have debt, take a big sigh of relief and just check out. You're blessed. But those who have debt and feel that burden of it, this is what a lender says. Okay? This is a metric that a lender would say. That DSCR, we're so addicted to acronyms. DSCR, debt service coverage ratio. Basically, this says, easy way to think about it is, if your annual payments for your loan is $100,000 a year, basically, an institution, a financial institution who's your lender, wants you to be able to demonstrate the bottom line that you have the ability to make $100,000 of payments. Simple. Okay? So when it says 120% DSCR, that means you actually are showing $120,000 able to pay $100,000. Make sense? Okay? That's the bottom line, essentially, for any lender. It doesn't matter who you're talking to. So here's what the statistic says. These are early warning signs we take a look at. It says DSCR of 100% is 412% more likely to default than a loan of 120%. Do you think we watch that? Oh, absolutely. How about when your coverage ratio is 80% below, you're not showing the ability to actually make your payments on an annualized basis. 700% more likely to default than a loan with 130%. And then here's another issue we take a look at, loan to value. If you have debt How much has my property value dropped? And I know it's very scary today. But we desire to try to communicate in advance how you can mitigate some of those concerns. That's why these early warning signs are very important to us as a lender. The financial metrics that we want to educate our ministries in. Loan to value, if it's 80%, it has a 30% greater chance of default than a loan with a loan to value of 70%. Now this is businesses in general too, because it's taken from Bank Investment Daily as of July 19th of 2011. This isn't just nonprofits. This is everybody, commercial loans in general. But to also take a look at loan to value, if it's greater than 86%, it means it's less likely for a borrower to protect their equity. They'll walk away. So one of the things, I actually put a handout in your packet, one of the things that we developed to try to bring and uncover some of the early warning signs, it's this financial health assessment. This is something that we have all of our ministries go through. Some of the ministries here represented have actually gone through this exercise, not only with their finance committee, maybe with some with the board. But this is something that this is our dashboard that we communicate to our ministry to say, we have nothing to hide. You like the church name, Broncos Community Church in Parker? There's a reason for that. But all that to say, we take a look at trends, at numbers, at direction, benchmarking. Let's take a look at some of the financial metrics. And we'll get into some of the key performance ratios here real quick. If you want to dig more into this whole financial health assessment, we'd love to do that for any of the ministries, if it means it helps you become better and more effective in what you do. Financial metrics, income. Our underwriters will take a look at income and expenses, obviously, and even from the perspective as on a per attendee basis. So when we take a look at income and we see, and we take a look at, on average, what does your attendee typically give in tithes and offerings? Do you know what the national average is? National average, denominational, cross-denominational, independent, you name it. It's $1,000 per attendee per year. Okay? So what we take a look at as a benchmark is 1,000 per attendee. And so we look at a congregation of 1,000 and say, budget should be about $1 million, right? But when we see a church that's showing maybe $3-4 million, it speaks to their commitment. You can draw a lot of conclusions from it. But do you see how benchmarking is so important for us to know where you are relative to that? And part of it has to do with maybe the DNA of the church as well. If you're growing because of new believers, boy, we would expect the trend of attendance to skyrocket quicker than the income because they don't quite understand tithes and offerings, and we would celebrate with you. So we take a look at from that financial metric. Cash, unrestricted cash. Operational reserves, capital reserves. I was talking with the ministry, and he was sharing during break, and yeah, they were having a tough time just trying to, how much cash do you keep? At some point, how much does it become just hoarding, right? That's the hard part, because you have all these stakeholders who will say, you know what, Bob, that's just hoarding. We can't keep it there because we have to keep using it for ministry. But yet, we know statistically, we know from ECCU's experience, that the ministries that are struggling and almost to the point of failure, in closing, leadership, number one, problem. 2, liquidity or lack thereof. No operational reserves and no capital reserves. What happens if certain capital expenses, major capital expenses happen within the ministry? Take a look at attendance from an enrollment perspective. Those are metrics that we'll always take a look at. Teacher to student ratio. Donor concentration we'll take a look at. We'll want to see, boy, if your top 5 donors represent over 20% of your total giving, top 5 representing over 20% of your total giving, then we would say you have a concentration of risk. Now, that doesn't mean go to the donor and say, hey, you know what, could you do me a favor? We need to lower the 20%, so could you not give? Please don't do that. It's just an awareness. It's a metric that we take a look at and take a look at very seriously. And then percentage of debt to income and staffing expense. Let me hit that here real quick. These are some of the key performance ratios we take a look at in that financial health assessment. So from a financial perspective and a lender perspective, these are numbers, again, benchmarking, right? Sure, I always get the argument, well, our staffing is a little bit higher than what you actually think that we ought to be operating under. There's always room for conversation. There's something unique about the DNA of your ministry. But we would take a look at liquidity. Yeah, 20% of operational expenses, of total operational expenses. Some of you guys are going, we would say that's probably prudent to have. Because we're quite uncertain in terms of how long this recession is going to last. How about debt to service ratio? This means the total amount of your budget that's allocated towards debt payments as a percentage of your income. If you're a church, how many churches here represented? Okay. Christian schools, I know there's Christian schools, okay? And then the rest of you are parachurch, okay? That's how we would classify you, parachurch, because you're so special, you're unique. But Colorado Springs, we have 167 parachurch organizations. They don't fall under this category. But this is how we would take a look at our underwriters. We have nothing to hide. Boy, if your debt service as a percentage of your total income, boy, you don't want to go over 35% of your total budget towards debt payments. For a school, less than 18%. Parachurch, less than 18%. For the salary expense ratio, this is where the rub comes a lot of times. We can't do ministry with that kind of a staff allocation. You know what? There's more and more volunteers, volunteer hours. Can you replace some of the paid positions with volunteers who have the same amount of passion for fulfilling the actual vision and the mission of your ministry? So for a salary expense ratio, church, 30 to 35%. School, less than 65%. That's the biggest expense for schools. And then parachurch, less than 65%. Okay? Then what underwriters will do, they'll actually add those two together. And they'll say, well, the debt service salary ratio. Well, for a church, 65-70, school 75-80, and parachurch 75-80, if you fall within those categories. And that's what we do, is we have benchmarks, and we take a look at it, and if you fall over that or you fall below that, certain conclusions are made. Conclusions, and then we try to mitigate some of the risks. And then the debt coverage ratio, as I explained before, if you have debt, we want to make sure that you have adequate cash flow to be able to pay for the debt. So those are some of the financial metrics that the credit union takes a look at, and frankly, that's for a lot of ministries out there too. But let me get into ministry metrics, because I think that's what's important more than anything else. Financial metrics are simply an indicator of what's going on in your ministry. When you're healthy financially, it's because something's going on in your ministry. God is at work. So the ministry metrics, maybe some of you measure the baptisms. That's important. The decisions, the public professions that are being made within your ministry. How important is that? Salvations, personal decisions for Christ. Focus on the Family actually has a log and a metric for this volunteer hours. They are heavy volunteer-led. Number of foster care children adopted. Gallons of water purified for Water Ministries International. Staff per attendee, dealing with people. Church plans. How about number of oil changes? I bring number of oil changes because one of my friends up in the Northern California area, they do oil changes for single moms. That's ministry impact, but that is a metric that's very important. So when you're asked that question by your stakeholder from the very beginning, it says, how do you know that we as a ministry are making progress toward the fulfillment of our mission and our vision? You could say, Joe, we ended up having 700 oil changes. We've touched 700 people in our community. Mark Holbrook, who you met earlier this morning, he shared one story a while back ago. He was over at Papua New Guinea, and he was talking with a missionary. This was years ago, and it was an elderly couple, and they had served 200 people in a specific tribe in PNG. And their work was done, they felt. And so Mark had asked them the question, so faithfulness, boy, how many people have you seen personal decisions for Christ? And they said, none. And they said, what are you going to do for the next 20 years? And they said, look over the ridge, and over the ridge there's another group of 200 in a new tribe, in a new language. We're going over there and we're investing our next 20 years over there. You see, that's ministry metric. Sometimes it doesn't make sense. Sometimes we're trying to measure the watering. They are watering and they are planting, and they are watering and they are planting. It's going to be God who's going to do the growing piece of it. So maybe there are some unique ministry metrics that you have within your particular church, within your particular Christian school. Take a look at here. This is actually a sample, and I know there's far more creative ways just within the ministries here. But this is out of ministry out of a Boulder. And this is what they present to their congregation and to anybody, all of their stakeholders, the same message. They gave them the critical numbers of budget, how they are relative to budget. And they also talk about ministry partnerships, the stories of how God is moving within their ministry. And they communicate this on a monthly basis, over and over and over again, so that everybody understands there's a desperate need within our ministry, but here's how we're doing. You think everybody's on the same page in this church? All the stakeholders, they are. But dashboards for who? Why are you making these ministry metrics and dashboards? We would say it's for all of these stakeholders. That's another word that we could be using. Your donors for your parachurch organizations. What information do they see? Do you just simply just go ahead and post your financial statements online? Do you really think your donors understand everything about the financial statements? How do you bring it into the language? I just like to say, for our financial statements at our church, I just like to say, hey, if I handed it to a 5th grader, could they understand where we're at? They don't have a lot of time. They just want to see how we're doing. Your congregation members, the parents of the schools, the board, the finance committee, ministry staff, your community, and then your financial institutions. Financial institutions, we're okay with the financial statements, okay? We're fine with that. But to all the other stakeholders, how do you communicate it in such a way that it communicates God's work in your ministry? But I think there's some dangers to measuring as well. Self-affirmation. You ever go to like a ministry or church conference, and I don't know why it is. I always have to, and you guys are thinking it right now, right? It's always the first question. It's like, so how big is your church? It's like, so what? Does that change your perspective of who I am as a disciple of Christ, as a follower of Christ? Does that discount any less of what we do? But that's what we do. Sometimes we get really puffy about it. It's like, we're sitting at around 23,000 people, right? Congratulations. You'll be held that much more accountable. Pride in numbers. Proverbs 16:18. Pride goes before a fall, doesn't it? It is. Not after, before. Pride in the numbers. And that's why I think it's very, very, very dangerous when we're beginning to embark on this metrics. Bigger is not always better, okay? Let's always remind ourselves, bigger is always not better, especially when it comes to ministry. Can create competition, can't it? I love what Eric Swanson says. He says, don't try to be the best church in the city, but try to be the best church for the city. Did you get that? Don't try to be the best and the biggest church in the city. Try to be the best and the most impactful church for your city. That's ministry metrics. And I think maybe for some of us, metrics addiction. I felt like all of us raising our hand and, I'm a business administrator and I'm addicted to numbers. Right? We see that time and time again. But here's some other examples. I love some of these examples from a church out in the East Coast Elevation Church. You're probably very familiar with it. I love the way that they actually create this. And maybe as a result of the session, a couple of you will meet together and begin encouraging and challenging one another to create something that's a little bit more visible, a little easier to understand, but it communicates the necessary things within your ministry. Love how the financials, the information is presented. They talk about savings, the reserves, expansion, breakdown. They give attendance figures for 2010 with the various campuses. They also take a look at, which I love, is the life change and the outreach. You see, that's ministry metrics. People, 10,000 lives have been changed. You think this church gets excited about what's going on? They do, because people are actually being impacted for the gospel. And outreach. Total outreach giving for this ministry, $1.371 million. I wish ministry didn't require money, but it does. And so we have a stewardship responsibility to be the best stewards that we can with what God has entrusted to us. This is how it changes behavior. This is the dashboard I take a look at when I drive. I am a hyper gas sensitive kind of guy now. I always want to just get higher and higher and higher in my gas. The dashboard I take a look at, I think the highest I've gotten was 64.3 miles per gallon. Now, granted, there were some moments where I was coasting, but it changes behavior. Doesn't it? The dashboard I constantly look at, it changes behavior. I know when I'm supposed to pull over for gas because the dashboard tells me. How important it is for our ministries to make sure that we are being stewards. And again, can we walk away and maybe try to think about designing a dashboard for our ministries? Before we go on to our panelist discussion, I'm going to have Jim and then Rufus and then Vana come on up here. I love what Albert Einstein said. He said, everything that can be counted does not necessarily count. Everything that counts cannot necessarily be counted. Isn't that true? How do you know if you're making a difference? I think we need to bring metrics back into the ministry so that we know that we're actually making an impact for the gospel. I'm going to ask Jim, Rufus, A panel of experts, literally experts, and then Vanna. Rufus, if you've never heard Rufus, Rufus is, and my apologies, Rufus, it says that he's with Bayside Church of Granite Bay. No, he's not. He doesn't go Sundays up there to Granite Bay. Rufus is the CFO and the controller over at Grace to You Radio Ministries up in Valencia. Jim Clark is the the administrative and the stewardship pastor over at right down the road here at First TV Free Fullerton. Okay, and Vanna, you all know Vanna? Everybody knows Vanna, right? Vanna from Cape and Krause, and she actually teaches in specifically related with benchmarking and metrics and ministries as well. And so I thought, a wealth of wisdom, I'm done talking. I'm going to let these panel of experts truly talk. And so what I'm going to ask is I'm going to ask a couple of questions to them. If you can go ahead and have a seat. We have the mic here. And seems like it's some ordination thing, doesn't it? No. They bring a tremendous wealth of wisdom in terms of what their ministries are doing. And I think everybody, we're trying to make continuous improvement in our ministries. Let me ask you, I guess, both for Jim and for Rufus, and then I have a very unique question for Vanna, because she comes from the CPA, Cape and Krause mind. Well, let me ask you, in terms of the metrics, what kind of financial metrics do you, within your ministry, do you measure? Maybe list one or two, and why do you measure those?
Well, I think some of them have already been shown, but one of the key things we do is a dashboard for our staff. We do very simple graphic representations to pastors who, are oftentimes, no offense to any of us that are out there, are not the most financially adept people in the ministry world, and they shouldn't be, because people is their focus. They're building into the lives of the body of Christ. So we try and create some very simple graphic representations of how they're doing compared to their budgets. They've got a gauge. The gauge is red, yellow, and green, and as it relates to various items in their budget, they can go down, and it's color-coded, and know how they're doing and continue to build to get more information on them. Another key bit of information for me is weekly reporting on first-time givers to our church. By the time somebody buys in and makes a first-time gift to our general fund. Now, people give to short-term missions, they might give to a special project, but we feel like when they finally make a gift that is part of the actual buy-in of the ministry is a key thing. It facilitates a personalized note from us to say, hey, thanks, we recognize this, we're glad you're part of our ministry, we want to be worshiping with you, we want to meet you, we want to partner with you and help you along your journey.
Fantastic. How about for you, Rufus?
I like the adage, cash is king, and we watch the cash very carefully. There's a certain report I get. We look at it on a daily basis, and recently in July, August, and September, we had an unforeseeable, unprecedented drop in our revenue. At the same time, we had some one-time expenses that came due we had to pay. So I watched that number go very quickly in just a few weeks from $6 million down to $4.8 million. And as I told the board yesterday, $6 million will cover a multitude of sins, and aren't you glad that we have a reserve, because we managed through that and now we're coming back up and we could take care of it while it was happening and know that it was happening, because we look at it very closely on a daily basis. We have a monthly set of reports that go to every member of the board of directors, every member on the audit committee, and certain management team members. Once a quarter, we embellish that with some graphs, and when I sit down with the board twice a year and go through the financial report, we usually don't look at numbers. We only look at the pictures. And I've developed a system of graphs that show the balance sheet, the assets and liabilities, the income statement, both the current month, year-to-date, and about 20 years of history, a cash flow report, and a budget-to-actual report by department. It's all shown to them by graphs. So even the most pastoral, unfinancial guy on the board knows where we're at. They can look at the pictures. And so we try to make sure it's communicated regularly, because I don't want to walk the plank by myself. If it's going down, they're going with me.
Let me ask you, Vanna, I know in the world that you live in, what would you say are maybe the top 3 or 5, or whatever number you come to, in terms of the non-negotiable financial metrics that a ministry must? Now, you're coming from the CPA mind as you audit financials and you live in this world.
Sure. Well, I won't make anyone here tell me or the group what's included in it, but how many of you have heard me speak on and on about the cash availability report? A number of you should be raising your hands, otherwise I will continue to harp on this every time I'm in a group of people. And while it's not necessarily a ratio or a metric in that regard,
Sure.
I think one of the most important things that they need to do is to calculate that cash availability, which simply starts with how much cash do we have, subtract from that how much do we have committed over the next several days, accounts payable, payroll if that's coming due, those immediate liabilities, and subtract from it the temporarily restricted amounts that are included in that cash balance. And that will take you down to cash availability. And those two numbers are typically very, very different numbers. And if I give a board member $6 million of cash, and then I give them, but of that, $1.2 million is usable, those are two very different decisions that they'll make based on that. So that to me is key. If you don't take anything else out of anything I say, that I think is the most important thing. Another thing is to look at the undesignated net assets and back out of your unrestricted, that is part of your net investment in fixed assets and that the board has designated, to see what do we truly have as undesignated, unrestricted net assets, because those are the funds that are available if, senior leadership suddenly decides that God's called them to do this new program or to, get into this new venue or do something. Do you really have the funds to be able to support it is one of them. As far as a metric or ratio, I think looking at your current ratio, your assets to liabilities, and some of the debt ratios that you spoke about earlier. My only caution, David, is you talked about you make them so that a fifth grader could understand them, but I've watched Are You Smarter Than a Fifth Grader? And I'm not sure that's a good enough standard.
Okay, third grader. I can't even help my daughter's homework right now, so you're right. Let me ask you, Jim and Rufus, you described a little bit in terms of the dashboards that you currently use right now. Do you, the kinds of dashboards that you use, are they different for different, as I talked about, the different stakeholders within your ministry, for a congregation member versus maybe a finance committee member versus maybe within your community? Do you even make it available even online?
We don't currently make them available online, but yes, they're at various degrees of information. Trustees are getting much greater level of depth. Finance committee of our trustees are getting monthly details of why budgets are above or below. Elders a little bit higher level. We do quarterly business meeting of the congregations who get a little less. They don't need to know the balances in each designated restricted, unrestricted fund versus that. And one of the things that for us that we try and graphically represent too, I'm sure many of your ministries have the similar issue. We actually plan on a negative cash flow basis through the fall, getting into December. So we don't want to freak people out when they see, oh yeah, we're actually expecting to go into our reserves, into October and November, but giving is expected, of course, to ramp up and out, and that we'll be secure. We've actually planned for some of those things, and it's important for your board to be able to see that so they're not concerned when the operating cash is running a little short.
As a parachurch, our biggest stakeholders are four: our board of directors, our audit committee, the Internal Revenue Service, and our friendly auditors, represented by the lady on my left. So I have to be careful what I say, or she'll audit me extra next time. But those all get every level of detail. We have our audited financial statement posted on our website. Obviously, anybody can pull down the 990 off a GuideStar. And if anybody calls and wants more information, we give it to them. But we get very few requests for information from donors. Our experience is they either trust you or they don't, and we're working hard to maintain their trust so we don't have to answer hard questions that don't have a good answer.
Vonna, I know because of the number of ministries that you specifically work with, she's lived in Colorado Springs, so she's seen the parachurch world as well. But do you see ministries today as a percentage, let's say if you just threw it out, okay? I won't hold you to it. I won't audit the number. But as a percentage of ministries out there that are incorporating any kind of a dashboarding and metric system and benchmarking those, what would you say that number is today?
I think it's really low.
No, a number.
I will give you
Oh,
a
okay.
number, I promise. I have to qualify everything.
Okay.
But I think there are most ministries that compare their budget to actual expenses. But as far as taking it beyond that and coming up with a couple of key metrics and some dashboard reports, of the ones that we see, I would say it's honestly 10% or less.
Wow. Wow. Just with a show of hands, maybe within, just even in the audience, are there ministries that actually incorporate and utilize any kind of a dashboarding and metric system that's very visual? Wow. You're probably
10%.
Right. You're probably right, 10%. Wow. It's a challenge. And I think maybe dovetailing into the question of why, and I know I didn't ask these questions to you, Jim and Rufus, before, but let me ask you. Why do you think, maybe to Vanna, why do you think ministries, why we have such a low amount? And what do we need to try to get that back up? It's impromptu.
Well, I think that you have to make it a priority. And if you don't set it as a priority to be able to help, let me maybe back up and start over. We fight a governance and management issue often in our churches and parachurches. And it's always a constant struggle. How much information do we share that enables to govern but not get our boards and others involved in issues of micromanagement? You've got to find the right matrices, what's the right word, Rufus? You know, to help provide your board with the information that's going to help them govern most efficiently, and make that a priority to them. I also think it's really important. We have mission statements, and we've got to find the things to measure and be consistent in that. Otherwise, we go with the wind.
Yeah.
It's important. It's really important for us to determine how we're doing on our values. How are we accomplishing our vision without consistent reporting, without consistent matrix, visuals, whatever? We're going to be flapping in the wind out there.
What for you, Rufus?
I would venture a guess that for a lot of us, there's just the tyranny of the urgent, and we don't see it as important because we've got so much on our plates trying to do that it looks like just one more thing. For me, I think it's a very important thing. I've seen firsthand the effects of the leadership not being informed in an organization, and then when things go south, it's not pretty. It's better to keep everybody informed with good matrix that we can all agree on are important and we all look at together on a periodic basis and evaluate and respond and react to, rather than waiting until it's a crisis and how did this happen, why didn't you tell me, all those kind of questions that you don't want to be in the position of answering. So that's my take on it.
I would say that mine's a combination kind of this, and that is, it's very difficult to determine what to measure from the very start. What do I measure? I mean, there's 100 different things we could. And then how do I do that? And once I get the results, how do you communicate those? I mean, Rufus and I have talked about that on a couple of occasions looking at graphs. If you don't have the explanation behind it, you can see where those graphs and metrics could be used as a weapon instead of a tool. And so I think there's some reservation there. I think that's one of the things. And then the second is just, while it may not be faster to do what we've always done, it sure seems like it, because it seems like it takes an awful lot of effort to create the new, even though there may be efficiencies gained if we were able to put that together. So, you know, understaffing and time, like you've both mentioned, is a huge issue.
Absolutely. You know, I talked a lot about the financial metrics that obviously in the world that we live in here at the credit union, but also talked about the ministry metrics. Describe for us maybe some of the non-financial metrics that you actually have within your ministry, if you have them, and why do you do that?
My end of things is much more financial related, but even things like tracking registrations to activities. You know, it's not all about numbers, but when I see that a women's Bible study has 300 women this year and 175 the next, and 120, I'm just pulling numbers out of the sky. I want to know, is that a result of a program that's run its course? Is it not effective? Is there something that needs to be done to pump life into it? You know, of course, the growth aspect is a whole element that I'm not good at helping to determine. There's great studies out there that help you understand, you know, how a person's growing in their spiritual life. But I really think those are important. Boards need to be asking those questions. Mm-hmm. Is program effective? And I think we oftentimes allow programs to go on and on and on, and we then fail to make tough decisions in favor of new and exciting things that could be doing a better job of reaching our people.
Great point.
From a non-financial aspect, we are a Bible teaching ministry, and it's important to us that our ministry is getting out to the people that would benefit from those resources. So we want to know how many radio stations we're on, how many people are listening. We also want to know how many resources they're requesting. If we have a book offer, we offered John MacArthur's book, Slave. We were able to give away over 30,000 of those. We gave away the ESV version of the MacArthur Study Bible. It was over 45,000. That's successful. At one time, we were selling sermon downloads. Pastor MacArthur has over 3,000 sermons on the New Testament. We were selling them for, I don't know, a couple, $3 each. We were distributing about 3,000 a month. In November of 2008, the management team made the decision we're going to give those all away for free. And we didn't know what that would do to our distribution. Right away, the number jumped up to 1 million a month. And since November of 2008, we've given away for free well over 40 million sermon downloads. Now, to us, that shows us that that's ministry. I look at that number every month. When the IT guy sends that to me, I look at that number. How did we do last month? The revenue may have been temporarily down. There may have been a problem. But if those sermon downloads are going out, we're doing something right in our ministry, and we got to figure out a way to support it with whatever the resources are that the Lord is giving us.
Let me ask you, I'm going to take it out into the audience, and I didn't prep any of them for questions that could be fielded from the audience, but are there any specific questions that maybe, and the mic's out there, any specific questions that maybe you have that any of these panelists could answer for you during this time? Right behind you first.
Test, okay. You asked the question about the percentage of ministries that have dashboard metrics and reporting, and that's something we've really been trying to focus on. I think you hit something very key on what to measure, but do you see technology being one of the biggest hurdles for a lot of ministry as being able to capture those metrics? You know, one thing they have in software is garbage in, garbage out. If you don't have anything to put it into, how do you get it out? How do you spit it out? You know, I know there's different ministry management tools like Power Church and Servant Keeper and things like that. Are those the main systems of record that you can pull your metrics out of, or are these manual reports that are being tabulated by the individual department leaders, let's say Sunday school, in their attendance or what have you, and those things being turned in and having to be entered into the system or whatnot? What is the biggest hurdle? Because I don't think it's that churches don't want to have metrics. It's how do you get them with the resources you have currently?
I'll start, and someone can jump in from there. The ministry metrics, I think, really primarily need to come out of your system. Because if they don't, it just leaves us more room for error. And I've seen that happen, and then you have information that's, you know, subject to question by the board and others who are looking at it. So to the extent you can, I would leave it in there and pull it out of there. And a lot of times what I hear is our system won't do that, our system won't do that. And it may be the case, but most often it's just a matter of training and really understanding what your system can do. And we see that a lot of times. The non-ministry metrics, from what I've seen, those primarily have to come from outside of a system other than things that are in your church management system, like, you know, attendance and tracking Sunday school participation and things like that that are in the management side of the software.
When David asked me to be on this panel, I thought the only dashboard I got's on my car, and I'm always looking at the speedometer and the rearview mirror, you know. But I do get by paper right now all the information I would like to have, and I'm thankful for that. But my IT guys tell me maybe in the next 4 to 6 months, they're going to be able to pull it all together for me in one report that'll come on my computer screen. I'm looking forward to that, and we got some guys that can do that, but they'll be pulling it, as Vonna recommended, directly from our systems, but then putting it in one place, so I'm not shuffling through papers looking for the numbers.
And I'm going to echo Vonna, except to say somebody on your team has to think like a database person. You know, databases are simple, but they're also complex. And you've got to have somebody on your team who can think about how to pull the information, how to run the queries, how to present it. And I agree. I think that's largely a training issue. You've got to spend the money to bring those people who are running your church management software, Shelby, whoever it is that's doing that. You've got to have somebody expert in that software on your team.
Absolutely. There is I think on the handout, maybe towards the end of the slide, these two that I came across actually, one's on our website as well, but churchmetrics.com, I think this spawned out from Fellowship One, I think. It may have. But that particular website, I've kind of played around with it myself for my particular church, but it's an interesting website. I think they're still very much in the development phase of it. But the other one that I've been really impressed with, this is really more on a very business-minded. There's all nonprofit organizations, hospitals, you name it, to schools. Love how the dashboards work. Very, very simple, very visual. You click over one little section of the pie, and it gives an explanation of it. Beautiful. idashboards.com. I don't know the cost of it. I'm not endorsing it. ECCU is not endorsing it, okay? Disclosure. But I'm looking for all different kinds of resources. Again, I think the beauty is we're trying to find something. We're trying to find a solution, I think, to an issue that we have.
You answered his question, so
Oh, perfect right there.
you're a prophet.
So, okay. Any other questions? Okay.
Oh, got one.
One of those areas of character and maturity that objective analysis is difficult. Have you found some good examples of how people have begun to measure number of days a week that a person is reading scripture, or showing kindness to a neighbor, or doing some things that would actually begin to show some transformation going on? It's too easy to say, we've got more people coming, but have you got more people maturing? And what kind of metrics have you observed, or would you commend on areas of character and maturity?
Jim?
They pass the mic to me because I'm the church guy, and the answer is no. Yeah, there are tons out there. You probably know them better than I. And there are books written on evaluating spiritual growth, and you really need to find one that fits well, 12 steps, whatever those may be. We don't use one in particular, and I think if you asked 10 pastors on our staff, each one of them would have a different answer for what those should be, so I'm sorry.
Got a question here, David.
Hi, I don't want to make an assumption, but when you all are referring to systems, I've heard that word used multiple times. Can you define, when you say systems, do you mean Excel, Access, Visio, Fellowship One, Church Community Builder? So when you're saying pulling information from your systems, can you define what you mean by systems?
Sure. I'm referring to whatever you're entering information into. So the database you might be using, the general ledger system that you might be using, if you're a church, the church management software, wherever your information is held. Honestly, I still have sat in a few of these sessions, and their system was either an Excel spreadsheet or good old green bar paper and pencil. Well, that's their system, but for most of us, it would be the database or the general ledger.
We've got about one more minute, David.
Or we could take an 11-minute break.
As you look for that last answer, I want to just real quick give you one more resource that Cape and Krause
Absolutely.
has that launched just Friday evening after a long, long time in the making. And that is, it's the Church Financial Health Index. It has 40 ratios that are part of that. Many of you are churches that we work with, and you already receive that, but we've made that available on the web
Fantastic.
now so that you are able to do that. And for smaller, this is geared at churches right now, and it's primarily geared for those that do their accounting in accordance with GAAP financials. In the next year, we'll roll that out and make that a smaller product that's more applicable to the smaller churches. But you can find that by going to capeandcrouse.com and looking at that as well.
Fantastic. Another great resource. Thank you once again, and enjoy the break here.